The roar of the private jet's engines echoed across the quiet runway as it descended under the blanket of a golden sunset. The city below glittered with lights, but the man inside the jet wasn't paying attention to the view. His sharp eyes were fixed on nothing in particular, as though his mind was caught between excitement and suspicion. This man was Daniel Crawford, a billionaire whose name commanded respect in every business circle across the world. Daniel wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful, brilliant, and known for his relentless determination. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about his empire. No meetings, no contracts, no boardrooms. His heart beat with only one thought: home. For months, Daniel had been away in Europe, negotiating one of the biggest deals of his life. Everyone thought he'd stay longer, perhaps another few weeks, maybe even months. But something strange had pulled him back. A whisper inside his chest told him, "Go home. Something isn't right." It wasn't planned. Not even his staff or closest advisors knew he was returning. He wanted it that way. He wanted to walk back into his mansion without warning, to feel the pulse of his home without the polished act his staff usually put on when they knew he was coming. As the jet wheels screeched against the runway, Daniel leaned back in his leather seat, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Memories of his mansion came flooding back: the grand staircase that curved like a royal crown, the smell of polished wood, the garden where his mother once planted roses, and the giant dining hall where laughter used to echo when his late father hosted gatherings. It wasn't just a house. To Daniel, it was the heart of his life. The moment the jet came to a stop, his driver Thomas stood ready by the sleek black limousine. Thomas had been with Daniel for years, a quiet, loyal man who didn't ask questions. Daniel stepped out of the jet, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his expensive shoes clicking against the ground. The cool evening air brushed against his face, but he didn't shiver. Instead, a strange chill ran through his heart. "Welcome back, sir," Thomas said respectfully, opening the door. Daniel gave a small nod but said nothing. He slid into the back seat, his mind racing with thoughts. The car pulled out of the runway and glided smoothly through the city streets. Daniel watched out the window as the world passed by. Bright billboards, busy shops, families walking together, couples laughing on sidewalks. All so ordinary. Yet in Daniel's world, nothing ever felt ordinary. He lived in a universe of wealth, deals, power, and endless eyes watching him. But tonight, he felt like just a man longing to step back into the comfort of home. He imagined the mansion as it should be, perfectly lit, polished floors shining, loyal staff standing in attention, welcoming him back with respect. He imagined Harris, his old butler, bowing politely, ready to serve. He imagined order, discipline, and the sense of belonging he always felt when he walked through those giant gates. But the longer he rode, the more uneasy he became. The streets grew darker, quieter, as the car entered the private lane leading to the Crawford estate. Daniel sat forward, his jaw tight. "Thomas," he said suddenly. "Yes, sir." "Did anyone know I was returning today?" "No, sir. Not a soul." "As you instructed." Daniel leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Good." The limousine turned, and at last the massive Crawford mansion came into view. Even from a distance it looked breathtaking. The grand pillars, the tall iron gates, the sprawling grounds. It was a palace in its own right, a symbol of his success. Yet something about the view made his chest feel heavy. The gates opened with their usual mechanical hum, and the limousine rolled in. But Daniel's sharp eyes caught something unusual. The grounds looked untidy. The grass wasn't trimmed as neatly as it always had been. The lights on the garden pathway flickered, as though no one had bothered to fix them. He frowned. When the car stopped, Daniel stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. The night air carried faint sounds: laughter, chatter, clinking glasses, but not the kind of laughter he expected. This wasn't the respectful tone of his staff waiting to welcome him. This was careless, wild. His chest tightened. He slowly walked toward the massive front doors. Normally, 2 guards would be stationed there, standing tall, disciplined, almost like soldiers. But tonight, the doors stood wide open and no guard was in sight. The once pristine marble entrance was smudged with dirt, as though no one had bothered to clean it for days. Daniel's fists clenched. What is going on here? With every step he took, his pulse quickened. His mansion, the pride of his family name, felt different. The air inside seemed wrong, heavy with smells of alcohol and cheap perfume. He could hear music echoing faintly from deeper inside, mixed with voices shouting and laughing. It was no longer the silent, disciplined home he remembered. It was chaos. Daniel paused in the grand hallway, his heart pounding. His eyes darted across the familiar chandeliers, the walls decorated with priceless art, the staircase lined with red velvet carpet. Everything was still there, yet it didn't feel like his home anymore. The sound of glasses clinking again reached his ears, louder now. And beneath it, footsteps running, careless voices, as though the mansion had turned into some kind of playground. His jaw tightened, his breath sharp. He had left behind a mansion full of order, loyalty, and respect. But what he had returned to felt like a stranger's house. And though he hadn't seen the full picture yet, one thing was already clear. Something had gone terribly wrong in his absence. Daniel Crawford, the man who controlled empires, who feared nothing, who could silence a boardroom with a single look, stood frozen in his own hallway, his heart heavy with dread. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt a shiver of fear. Daniel's shoes echoed against the marble floor as he stepped deeper into the mansion. With every footstep, the sound of laughter and music grew louder, almost mocking him. This wasn't the careful silence of a household waiting for its master to return. No, this was disorder, disrespect, and something far darker. The air reeked of spilled wine and smoke. The chandeliers, once glowing with regal elegance, flickered unevenly, as though they too were tired of being ignored. Dust clung to the corners of the high ceiling, and Daniel's sharp eyes caught faint shoe marks on the once pristine white floor. His jaw tightened. How could this happen? When he left, the mansion was flawless. Everything had its place, every corner polished, every servant moving with precision. Now it felt like a stranger's house. He followed the sound of voices, each step bringing him closer to the source. He passed the gallery where portraits of his ancestors lined the walls. These were the Crawfords who had built the empire he now owned, men and women who demanded respect and loyalty. But tonight, their painted eyes seemed to stare down at him with silent disappointment, as if asking, "What have you allowed to happen?" Finally, Daniel reached the grand lounge. He froze at the doorway. The room was unrecognizable. The Persian rugs were stained, the velvet curtains half torn, and the long polished table was covered in half-empty wine bottles, broken glasses, and scraps of food. Several unfamiliar people lounged lazily across the expensive sofas, laughing too loudly, talking too freely, their shoes dirtying the silk upholstery. His sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Who are you?" The laughter stopped for a second. A few heads turned lazily toward him. A man with greasy hair smirked and raised his glass. "Who are you? Walking in here like you own the place?" Daniel's eyes darkened. He didn't respond. He simply walked into the room, each step measured, heavy with authority. Some of the strangers shifted uncomfortably, sensing something powerful in his presence. Others scoffed, clearly too drunk or arrogant to realize who stood before them. "Where is Harris?" Daniel demanded, his voice booming. The name seemed to snap some of the staff awake. A young maid who had been sitting nervously in the corner jumped to her feet. Her eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Mr. Crawford, you're back." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Suddenly, murmurs spread. Some of the strangers sat upright, their smugness vanishing. Others paled, realizing the mistake they had just made. But Daniel's face remained hard as stone. He turned his gaze to the hallway leading toward the dining hall. He could hear more laughter coming from there, louder, bolder, as though the heart of the betrayal waited just ahead. His footsteps quickened. He pushed open the tall oak doors, and what he saw made his chest tighten with rage. The grand dining hall, the crown jewel of his mansion, had been turned into a place of mockery. The long dining table, where business deals were once sealed and family gatherings held, was now littered with spilled wine, greasy plates, and scattered playing cards. His priceless silverware, passed down through generations, was being used carelessly, as if it were disposable, and at the head of the table sat Harris. The butler Daniel had trusted for over 2 decades, the man who had stood by him through triumphs and losses, was leaning back in the master's chair, holding a glass of wine, laughing as though he were the lord of the house. Daniel's body froze. His fists curled. Harris looked up, mid-laughter, and his face drained of colour. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. "Sir," Harris stammered, standing slowly, We didn't expect you." Daniel's piercing voice cut him off. "Didn't expect me? This is my home, and I returned to find this." The room fell into complete silence. Every servant, every stranger, every betrayer turned pale. Some lowered their eyes, others shifted nervously in their seats. Daniel's gaze swept across the hall. He saw the greed in their eyes, the laziness in their bodies, the lack of fear that came from believing the master would never return. They had grown comfortable, too comfortable. The weight of betrayal pressed down on his chest like a heavy stone. These were the very people he had fed, clothed, paid generously, and treated with dignity. He had always believed loyalty was priceless, but tonight he saw how cheaply loyalty could be sold. Harris finally found his voice, his hands trembling. "Sir, please. It's not what it looks like." Daniel's voice thundered, shaking the walls. "Not what it looks like? Then what is it, Harris? Because it looks like a pack of rats, feasting on the wealth of the man who trusted them." The staff flinched. A few of the strangers tried to quietly slip out of the room, but Daniel's glare stopped them cold. No one moved. The billionaire's chest heaved, his pulse racing. Anger burned in his veins, but beneath the fury was something deeper, hurt. To him, betrayal wasn't just about money. It was personal. He had trusted Harris like family, and family had spat on his trust. As silence stretched, Daniel's ears picked up something faint, a sound that didn't belong. It was soft, fragile, almost like a whimper. His head turned sharply toward the corner of the dining hall, where a small shadow crouched. He narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. What he found there would cut deeper than any betrayal of wealth. But for now, Daniel stood in the ruins of his own home, surrounded by traitors, his heart heavy with the knowledge that everything he thought was safe had rotted from within. The mansion, his pride, his fortress, had become a place of secrets, and tonight every single one of those secrets was about to come to light. The shattered glass rolled across the marble floor, scattering like tiny diamonds under the dim chandelier light. Harris's trembling hand hovered in the air, as if reaching for words he couldn't find. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick, heavy, charged with the weight of guilt. Daniel Crawford stood at the doorway of his own dining hall, his body rigid, his piercing eyes sweeping over the shameful sight. His chest rose and fell, his breath sharp, as though each inhale carried the bitter taste of betrayal. This hall had once been sacred. He remembered sitting at the very same table with his late parents, the echo of their laughter bouncing off the walls. Deals worth millions had been signed here. Leaders, celebrities, even foreign dignitaries had once admired the elegance of this room. And now? Now it looked like a cheap tavern. Plates smeared with grease cluttered the table. Empty wine bottles rolled dangerously close to the edges. Priceless crystal goblets lay stained, one even cracked from careless handling. And at the center of it all was Harris, the man Daniel had trusted most, sitting in the master's chair, as though he owned it. "Explain this," Daniel demanded, his voice low, deep and terrifying in its control. No one dared speak. The staff exchanged nervous glances, their arrogance from earlier evaporating. The strangers who had been invited in like parasites shifted uncomfortably, realizing the storm they were trapped in. Harris swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Daniel and the floor. "Sir, please. It's not what it seems." Daniel's voice cracked like thunder. "Not what it seems? Do you take me for a fool, Harris?" He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the sound of his shoes echoing through the hall. "I left this house in your care. I gave you trust, loyalty, respect. And what do I find? My butler. My butler. Sitting in my chair, drinking my wine, turning my home into a playground for thieves and rats." Harris's lips trembled, but no words came. Daniel's glare swept across the others, catching a maid clutching her apron, a cook looking down in shame, 2 guards fidgeting at the back of the room. He had trusted them all, paid them handsomely, treated them with dignity. And in return, they had eaten like kings while pretending he would never return. "Do you know what cuts deeper than betrayal?" Daniel's voice shook with emotion, though he never lost control. "It's betrayal by those you call family. Harris, you weren't just a servant to me. You were the man I trusted more than anyone. I gave you the keys to my life. And this is how you repay me." Harris's face twisted, torn between shame and desperation. "Sir, I only wanted to keep the staff happy. They felt abandoned while you were away. I thought some leniency—" "Leniency," Daniel spat, his eyes blazing. "This isn't leniency. This is theft. This is greed. This is betrayal." His voice rose, filling every corner of the dining hall, shaking the very walls. A few of the strangers who had been feasting moments ago cowered, sliding lower in their chairs, wishing they could vanish. One man tried to slip out quietly, but Daniel's icy gaze snapped to him like a blade, freezing him in place. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating. No one dared move. Daniel walked to the head of the table, his eyes locked on Harris. He stood directly across from the man who had once been his most loyal servant. The sight of Harris standing in his place filled him with disgust. Slowly, Daniel placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. His voice dropped, quiet but deadly. "We're supposed to protect this house." Harris's shoulders sagged, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Sir, forgive me. I lost myself." Daniel's chest tightened. For a fleeting moment he almost remembered the loyal man Harris had once been, the man who had stayed up nights organizing the household, who had guided Daniel after his father's death, who had stood silently by his side at every gathering. But the image shattered as he looked around at the wreckage. That man was gone. "You didn't lose yourself, Harris," Daniel said coldly. "You sold yourself." The words cut through the hall like a knife. Harris bowed his head, his lips trembling. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The weight of Daniel's disappointment filled the air like smoke. It was unbearable, pressing down on every chest in the room. And then Just as Daniel was about to unleash his fury further, a faint sound broke the silence. A soft whimper. Daniel's sharp ears caught it instantly. His eyes narrowed, scanning the corners of the room. There, near the base of the wall, half hidden behind a curtain, a small figure crouched. He frowned, taking a step closer. "Who's there?" The staff froze, exchanging nervous glances. No one answered. Daniel pulled the curtain aside, and his heart clenched at the sight before him. A young girl, no older than 12, sat on the cold floor, her tiny hands clutching a rag, her eyes swollen from crying. Her dress was torn, her feet bare, and her hair tangled. She looked up at him with fear, trembling as though she expected to be struck. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. "Who is this child?" he demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. No one answered. Harris shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. Daniel bent down, his tone softening as he addressed the girl directly. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her lips trembling. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice so faint it was barely audible. Daniel's heart sank. "Why are you here, Sophia?" Her tears spilled over as she choked out the words. They brought me here to work. Said you'd never come back. They make me clean. They don't give me food." Daniel froze. For a moment, he felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Rage and sorrow crashed together inside him, burning hotter than any betrayal he had ever felt. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about stolen wine, dirty floors, or wasted wealth. It was about an innocent child, suffering under the cruelty of those he had trusted most. His hands curled into fists, his voice trembling with controlled fury. He stood tall again, towering over Harris and the others, his presence heavier than ever. "You didn't just betray me," Daniel growled. "You betrayed humanity. You let a child suffer in my home. My home." Harris flinched, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. But Daniel felt no pity now. The betrayal was complete, the wound too deep to forgive. The room was silent, except for the soft sobs of little Sophia. And in that silence, Daniel made a promise in his heart. This would end tonight. The traitors would be cast out. His mansion would be restored. And most importantly, Sophia would never suffer another day under this roof. Daniel Crawford, the billionaire who had returned unexpectedly, now stood not as a man betrayed, but as a storm about to strike. For a long, heavy moment, the dining hall remained silent. The only sound was the faint crackle of a candle flame, fighting to stay alive in the suffocating tension. Daniel's gaze stayed locked on the child before him, the small girl crouched in the corner, with fear clouding her innocent eyes. Sophia. Her name alone felt fragile, as if saying it too loudly might shatter her completely. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her lips dry and pale. The rag in her trembling hand was dirty, the kind of cloth used to scrub floors. Her dress was torn at the seams, hanging loosely over her thin frame, and her bare feet pressed against the cold marble. The billionaire's chest tightened. He had seen countless deals, faced ruthless competitors, and looked corruption in the eye without flinching. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of this child suffering in his own home. Slowly, Daniel crouched down, bringing himself to her level. His voice softened, breaking through the icy rage that had filled the room only moments ago. "It's all right. You don't have to be afraid of me." Sophia's lips trembled. She tried to look away, but something in Daniel's eyes, an unexpected kindness, pulled her gaze back. They told me not to speak, she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Daniel tilted his head. Who told you? Her eyes flickered nervously toward Harris, then quickly back to the floor. That small glance was all the answer Daniel needed. His jaw clenched, his fury simmering beneath the surface, but he kept his tone gentle for the child. Tell me, Sophia, how long have you been here? Her tiny fingers tightened around the rag. Weeks, maybe more. I don't know. I lost count. Daniel's heart sank. Weeks. Weeks of this child living in misery, hidden within the walls of his mansion while he had been thousands of miles away. And what do they make you do? He asked carefully. Tears welled in her eyes again. I clean. I cook sometimes. I sweep the halls. I sleep in the storage room. Her voice cracked. Sometimes they don't give me food. They say I don't deserve it. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, fighting to steady his breathing. He could feel his blood pounding in his ears, his fury threatening to explode. But when he opened his eyes again, his gaze was steady, protective. He reached out a hand, palm open. You don't have to do any of that anymore. Do you understand me? Not anymore. Sophia hesitated. For a moment she flinched, as though afraid his hand might strike. But when Daniel didn't move, didn't force her, only waited patiently, she finally placed her small hand in his. Her skin was rough, scarred from hard labor, but her touch was feather-light, fragile. Daniel held it gently, as though he were holding something precious. He turned his head slowly toward Harris, his eyes sharp as blades. Explain this. Harris's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. He stuttered, Sir, it's not... Don't. Daniel cut him off, his voice like ice. Do not insult me with excuses. The staff shifted uncomfortably. None dared meet Daniel's gaze. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others fidgeted nervously, caught between fear and guilt. Daniel stood, still holding Sophia's hand, and his voice boomed across the hall. This child, in my house, forced into labor, starved, abused, while you drank my wine and sat in my chair. Do you understand what you've done? The silence was deafening. Harris's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel saw no remorse, only fear of being caught. Daniel's fury deepened. Wealth can be rebuilt, houses can be restored, but the soul of a child, once broken, it may never heal, and you dared to risk that in my home. His words struck harder than any physical blow. Even the strangers who had been feasting earlier now sat frozen, realizing they were in the presence of something far greater than a wealthy man. They were in the presence of a storm. Sophia tugged lightly at his hand, her voice trembling. Sir, can I go home? Daniel looked down at her, his expression softening instantly. Where is your home, Sophia? She shook her head slowly, tears spilling again. I don't have one. My parents, they left me. No one wanted me. The words pierced Daniel's heart like a knife. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury, yet here stood a child who had nothing, not even a place to belong. Kneeling once more, Daniel gently wiped her tears with his handkerchief. Then you don't have to worry anymore. From this moment, this is your home, and no one will ever hurt you again. I promise. Her wide eyes searched his face, as if trying to decide whether to believe him, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a small, fragile nod. Daniel rose again, his presence towering, his fury refocused. He turned back to the betrayers. His voice was low, deadly calm. the kind of calm that made even the bravest hearts tremble. You think betrayal is measured in stolen wine and broken furniture? No. The greatest betrayal is turning innocence into suffering. And for that, he paused, his gaze slicing through each of them. Your time in this house is over. Gasps rippled across the room. Harris fell to his knees, his voice breaking. Sir, please, mercy, I've served you for years. Don't cast me out like this. Daniel's face was stone. You were given trust, Harris, and you traded it for greed. Mercy is for those who stumble, not for those who deliberately destroy. Harris's pleas echoed, but Daniel had already turned his back. He led Sophia out of the dining hall, his stride firm, his resolve unshakable. As they walked, Sophia clung to his hand tightly, as though afraid he might vanish. Daniel squeezed back gently, silently reassuring her. In that moment, something shifted deep within him. For years, Daniel had believed his wealth was his greatest strength, his empire his greatest legacy. But tonight, holding the hand of a frightened child, he realized his true power lay not in money, but in protecting those who could not protect themselves. And though his heart was heavy with betrayal, it also burned with new purpose. The truth had been revealed, and now he knew exactly what he had to do. But the heavy doors of the dining hall slammed shut behind Daniel, the echo reverberating through the mansion like thunder. He stood tall in the grand corridor, Sophia's small hand clasped tightly in his. She clung to him as though he was the only safe thing in her world. But behind those closed doors, the betrayers still stood, their faces pale, their stomachs heavy with the stolen food and drink. They whispered nervously, some begging Harris to do something, others trembling in silence. It didn't matter. Their time had already ended. Daniel turned to Sophia and gently handed her to the maid, who had been too afraid to speak earlier. His voice was softer than a whisper, but firm. Take her upstairs. Give her food, warm clothes, and a bed. She is not to lift a finger in this house ever again. The maid nodded quickly, tears in her eyes, and led Sophia away. Daniel watched them go for a moment, his chest heavy with emotion. Then he straightened his suit jacket, rolled his shoulders, and turned back toward the hall. The wrath of Daniel Crawford was about to fall. He re-entered the dining hall slowly, deliberately. Every head turned toward him, fear etched deep into every face. His sharp footsteps echoed like a drumbeat of judgment. Without a word, he walked to the head of the table, the seat Harris had dared to claim, and stood there. His eyes swept across the room, burning into each traitor. "Stand," he commanded. The staff and strangers hesitated, unsure if they should obey. His voice cut sharper this time. "I said, stand!" Chairs scraped hurriedly against the floor as everyone stumbled to their feet. Some kept their heads low, others shook with fear. Daniel's hands rested on the back of the master's chair. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cold enough to chill the blood of everyone present. "When I left this house, I left it in your hands. I gave you food, salaries, comfort. I trusted you to treat this place with respect. Instead, what did you do? You turned my home into a circus. You drank, you stole, you mocked me. And worst of all," his voice grew darker, heavier, "you brought a child into slavery, under my roof." Gasps filled the room. A few of the servants who hadn't known about Sophia looked shocked, their eyes darting toward Harris, but none dared speak. Daniel's fists tightened on the chair. "Loyalty is the only currency that matters in this house, and you have all proven yourselves bankrupt." His glare landed on Harris, who stood trembling, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Harris, 20 years of service, 20 years of trust, and this is how you repay me? By stealing my chair, my home, and my dignity? Harris fell to his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Please, sir. I lost my way. I was weak. Give me one more chance, just one." Daniel's voice boomed like thunder. "One more chance? You had every chance. You had my trust, my respect, my kindness. You chose greed, you chose betrayal, and in this house, there is no place for betrayal." He pointed to the door, his eyes burning. "Get out!" The command hit like a whip. Harris's lips parted in shock. "Sir, please, out!" Daniel roared, the sound shaking the very walls. Harris flinched, his body trembling. Slowly, shamefully, he staggered to his feet and shuffled toward the door, his sobs echoing in the silence. No one dared move to help him. Daniel's eyes swept across the rest of the room. "As for the rest of you, you are finished here. You will take nothing with you. Not a uniform, not a coin, not even a crumb from this table. Leave my house at once." Panic erupted. Some began pleading. Others dropped to their knees, begging for forgiveness. One of the guards dared to protest. "But, sir, I only followed orders." Daniel silenced him with a single glare. "A man who follows corruption is no better than the corrupt." "Out." The guard fell silent, his shoulders sagging in defeat. One by one they shuffled toward the doors, their footsteps heavy with shame. The strangers who had been feasting on his wealth stumbled out quickly, eager to escape the storm. The cooks, the maids who had laughed with them, the guards who had abandoned their duty, all of them left, their heads bowed. Only a handful of silent staff remained, the ones who had not participated, the ones whose eyes showed guilt, but not greed. Daniel looked at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he said quietly, "If you want to stay, you will prove your loyalty from this day forward. There will be no second chances." They nodded quickly, tears of relief in their eyes. The hall was now empty, except for Daniel. He stood alone in the wreckage, the smell of wine and smoke still heavy in the air. Slowly, he sank into the master's chair, the seat that had always been his, and let out a long, heavy breath. For a moment, silence enveloped him. He could still hear Sophia's trembling voice in his mind, her small hands clutching the rag. He could still see Harris's betrayal, etched into his memory. And though he had cast them out, the wound in his chest remained raw. But as he sat there, his resolve hardened. This was no longer just about cleaning a house. It was about rebuilding something far greater: trust, dignity, and justice. He rang the bell on the table. One of the remaining loyal staff hurried in, bowing nervously. "Clear this mess," Daniel ordered, his tone steady but heavy with meaning. "Every bottle, every stain, every trace of what they did, remove it. Tonight, this house begins again." "Yes, sir," the servant whispered, hurrying to obey. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the grand chandelier above. It swayed slightly, reflecting light across the hall. For the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself a small breath of relief. He had taken back his house. He had cleansed it of betrayal. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Because the true fight wasn't against Harris or the traitors. The true fight was to protect the little girl upstairs, the innocent child who had suffered in silence. And Daniel Crawford, the billionaire who had returned unexpectedly, was ready for that fight. The mansion that once roared with betrayal now stood in silence. Its echoing halls no longer carried the laughter of thieves or the clinking of stolen glasses. Instead, there was quiet, a heavy, cleansing quiet that spoke of endings and of beginnings. Daniel Crawford stood at the base of the grand staircase, his hands folded behind his back. He had been walking the house all morning, checking each corridor, each corner, as though he was seeing his home for the first time. Everywhere he looked, there were reminders of the chaos. Wine stains on marble, broken glass glinting under chandeliers, expensive rugs ruined with careless spills. But beneath all the wreckage, Daniel saw something else. He saw possibility. The house could be cleaned, the wounds could be healed, his home could breathe again. He turned as footsteps echoed softly behind him. It was the maid he had sent to care for Sophia the night before. She bowed respectfully, her eyes lowered. "Sir," she said quietly, "the young girl is awake. She wishes to thank you." Daniel's heart softened. "Bring her to me." Moments later, Sophia appeared at the top of the staircase. She looked different already. She wore a simple but clean dress, her hair brushed, and her face no longer streaked with tears. She still looked fragile, but there was light in her eyes that had not been there before. As she descended the steps, Daniel stepped forward and extended his hand. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then placed her small hand in his. "Did you sleep well?" he asked gently. She nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. The bed, it was soft. I've never had a bed like that before." Her words pierced Daniel's heart. He knelt so he was at her eye level. "You will never sleep on the floor again. Do you understand me? Never." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief. She nodded quickly, unable to speak. Daniel squeezed her hand softly. "From now on, this is your home. You will eat at this table, you will go to school, and you will grow up with dignity. You are not a servant here. You are family." For a long moment, the child just stared at him, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then suddenly she threw her arms around him. Daniel froze, surprised by the gesture, but then wrapped his arms around her gently, like a father holding his child. And in that quiet embrace, something inside him shifted. For years, Daniel had built empires. He had measured his success in profits, properties, and power. But in that single moment, holding the trembling girl who clung to him with all her heart, he realized something far greater. Wealth meant nothing if it didn't change lives. Days that followed were filled with transformation. The mansion was restored piece by piece. Workers scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, replaced shattered ornaments, and repainted the walls that had been scarred by neglect. The air grew lighter, fresher, as if the very house itself was grateful for its master's return. But it wasn't just the house that was being rebuilt. It was Daniel himself. Every morning he shared breakfast with Sophia. She was timid at first, barely touching her food, glancing around as though afraid someone would punish her for eating. But Daniel encouraged her gently, smiling as he filled her plate. Slowly, she began to relax. She started to laugh, soft, hesitant giggles at first, but growing brighter with each passing day. He enrolled her in school, personally choosing one that would give her not only education but kindness. When the first day came, she clutched his hand tightly, her eyes wide with both fear and wonder. "Do you think they'll like me?" she whispered. Daniel crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Sophia, they will love you. And if anyone ever makes you feel small, remember this. You are Daniel Crawford's daughter now, and no one on earth can take that away." Her eyes widened. "Your daughter?" Daniel smiled softly. "Yes, if you'll allow me to be a father to you." The child broke into tears again, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded furiously and hugged him so tightly it nearly knocked him off balance. From that day forward, Sophia no longer felt like an outsider. She walked with a new kind of pride, holding her head high, carrying the invisible shield of Daniel's promise.
The city soon heard whispers of the billionaire's return and the scandal that had followed. Some mocked him for being deceived by his staff. Others praised him for his strength in reclaiming his home. But Daniel didn't care what the world thought. He had found something the world could never give him: purpose. At charity events, he began speaking about children like Sophia, children who were exploited, abused, and forgotten. He pledged large portions of his fortune to build shelters, schools, and safe homes. For every story like Sophia's, he vowed to make a difference. Reporters often asked him about the night he returned to his mansion. They wanted drama, gossip, scandal. But Daniel always gave the same answer, his voice steady and calm. Yes, I came home to betrayal. Yes, I was shocked by what I found. But I am grateful for that night. Because in the midst of darkness, I found light. I found my daughter. One evening, months after the chaos had ended, Daniel sat on the balcony of his mansion, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Sophia sat beside him, her legs swinging playfully off the chair, a book in her lap. She looked up at him suddenly. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. Daniel's gaze lingered on the horizon. He had been asked that question before, in countless interviews. And he had always answered with polished lines about work, success, and focus. But tonight, he didn't give the billionaire's answer. He gave the father's. "Not anymore," he said softly, turning to smile at her. "Because I have you." Sophia's eyes shone with happiness, and she leaned her head against his arm. Together, they watched the sun disappear behind the hills, leaving the world bathed in twilight. For the first time in years, Daniel Crawford didn't think about deals, boardrooms, or profits. He thought about laughter echoing in his halls again. He thought about Sophia's future. He thought about family. And as the stars slowly appeared in the sky, Daniel knew one truth above all others. The night he returned unexpectedly had been the darkest of his life. But it was also the night that gave him the greatest gift of all. A daughter. A purpose. A new beginning.